Well, one of the most fascinating aspects about Rolfing is the ability and, and involvement in trying to create a balance in the structure. You know, a balance not only in your structure, but I, Ralph, often thought that your structure, a balance in structure would equate to a balance in function. And function and structure play off each other quite a bit. So what we're able to do in our perspective of life in general enhances our own structure, and our structure and the function of our structure, the ability to stand up straight and move with a great deal of ease, will translate into how we see other things in our life and how we begin to interact with other things in our life. And one of the aspects of balance in the structure was this idea of tensegrity that Ida talked about. Buckminster Fuller used to talk about this. Kenneth Nelson was the first person who built this structure while he was in prison in a concentration camp, you know. And it was a system of cables and bars, and it's about 10 stories high. And it is a structure which has no center point, but is simply balanced by the tension and compression of these poles and cables, so that you can kind of pull on it and everything up above begins to move a little bit. And Bucky Fuller took this idea and started creating geodesic domes. The idea was that if you begin to have a structure that has inherent strength, in other words, the quality or the strength of the material itself, and we're not using steel girders, we're using fairly light materials. In fact, a good example of tensegrity is an egg, a chicken egg. You know, something that's so delicate it can crack if you drop it on a hard surface, but yet if you try to squeeze it with your hand, the egg simply will not break no matter how strong you are. So the structure, the inherent strength of the design of the structure is what gives it its strength. And as Bucky began to design geodesic domes, that was the idea that the structure itself, the design of the structure, was what gave it strength. We see this in nature. People are examining how cell structures are built, how our DNA is built. Everything in nature seems to have this structure of tensegrity, which is mostly built up of either 60-degree angles or 120-degree angles. Nowhere in nature do you see 90-degree angles. It's not a very strong structure. So in Rolfing, when we begin to balance a structure and we begin to see a sense of tensegrity in the body, we're thinking in terms of not only does gravity hold this body down to earth, but it also begins to lift things up when there is a better balance, when there is a sense of tensegrity, when there is a balance between the compression and a balance between the tension forces in the body, so that there's a certain amount of span. There's also, the ideas of balance in your physiology, balance in your nervous system between the sympathetics, the fight or flights, and parasympathetics, which regulate all your organ functions and all these functions that basically are going on all the time without your conscious effort. And what we find is that as we begin to balance the structure of someone, oftentimes the nervous system begins to quiet down. The breathing becomes a little bit more regular. The ability to take in a breath is a little more equal to the ability to exhale. Oftentimes people, if they have somewhat of a collapsed structure or things are fairly tight in the front, from sitting in front of a computer, for me it was playing guitar for years and years, and this was just really tight. It was hard for me to take in a big breath. I felt like I could, but I really couldn't. And until I got Ralph, then all this began to open up quite a bit, so that my inhale was a little bit more, or quite a bit more balanced and equal to the exhale. So there's a balance on many different levels. And again, as we begin to have this balance in our structure, it begins to just spill over into the rest of our lives. Have you found that to be true in your process of going through Rolfing 5 years ago?
Well, it started when I first went through the postural integration, which was a forerunner to Rolfing. I had so many broken bones and so many injuries, and plus so much pounding sports that I was pretty much glued together. And when I first went through that, I noticed a dramatic change and just in all my old injuries and stuff, that I became much more flexible. Then I went through the first series of Rolfing, which was even more effective, and then the second series of Rolfing, and then when I had the opportunity to work with you, it was dramatically improved, just because of your skill level, one, and how far Rolfing had advanced, because I went through my first series of Rolfings back in 1980, and then I started working with you, I guess, back in 2002 or 2003, and just the ability to understand Rolfing and its connection between the organs, the viscera, the whole structure that holds the body together, and how all the organ systems are sort of attached to this whole network of interlinking fibers, that by working on the whole thing that you realize that it's totally related. All the times when I had all of my injuries, all my broken bones, all the massive blows to the head, and just the major injuries, especially in surfing, because the amount of force that you get when you have like a 20-foot wave smashing you into a reef, or or getting hit by your board when you're tumbling, the forces are so huge. I can still remember times when a bad wipeout that would feel like all my joints are being pulled out of joint just momentarily. The forces were so strong, and just looking at my body in the mirror and just seeing just how much of like a mannequin I was just totally distorted. It was twisted here and torqued there, and I could notice it especially in playing sports and tennis, where you just certain strokes that you can't do. I noticed that after doing Rolfing with you, that it was much easier to do ambidextrous tennis and do strokes off of both sides, because I just wasn't totally glued together. And so the idea of being able to move freely in gravity without having gravity being your enemy and just completely pulling you down, like every step is like you're battling against this huge weight. It's like you're trying to walk through a tub of water. And by getting everything aligned through Rolfing and getting all the joints, all the myofascial tissue, all the little sacs that the muscles are contained in, that they're not glued together anymore, they're moving freely across each other, so it really frees up movement, it decreases the amount of energy that it takes to get to anywhere. And the way I know that everything is working good is that I'm not even cognizant of my body, it's just like I'm floating through space effortlessly.
That's great. That's great. Did you experience any change in how relations in the rest of your life worked, or how you began to see things, the perception of people that you worked with, lived with?
Well, the big thing is that having worked out all my life and being a pretty much right-brain person, A-type personality, and having a strong mind, I found that I was just sort of like a missile on target. I knew where I was going, and it was just like target oriented. People in my life sort of ricocheted off the pathway that I constructed, that I was traveling along at full speed, and people had a hard time dealing with where I was going just because it was such a total focus. And I found that once I started having the release of all the hardness that I had built and all the contraction that I had built for so many years of working out since I was 13, that builds up, a body that is rock hard, and it's pretty much able to take a lot of abuse and a lot of trauma, but it's not able to give much in return. Most of the stuff just bounces off. So as I was able to understand more through you as far as the importance of flexibility and softness, it's hard to get to the point where you have basically the balance between hardness built on by building up muscles to softness and flexibility designed by doing swimming and Rolfing and things in your life that you do that build flexibility. And so that's where the difficult area is to find a balance between hardness and softness emotionally. And so by going through Rolfing and being able to release all the injuries and all the pain and suffering of a tough life growing up as a kid with an alcoholic father, and just the amount of abuse that I received from him, not physical abuse, but just psychological abuse, never being able to do anything right, and always seeking approval, that as my body was able to be released and not be rock hard, it was easier to allow people to come into my life emotionally and give and receive emotions rather than just being like a rock hard, rock solid robot, impervious to any type of bullets that would come in my way. You know, wanting to be like Superman with the bullets ricocheting off of your chest, where mine was sort of like emotional bullets. You know, I could pretty much withstand any type of emotional attack and just walk away totally unaffected. It takes a lot of emotional openness and body openness to be able to receive emotion and also give emotion. So Rolfing's helped tremendously in that area.
Sometimes it's a little scary as you begin to shift from letting go of a certain amount of body armoring, and there's a certain sense of vulnerability that now, if you're open to what's going on around you, that there is that possibility that you can become hurt. But at the same time, life becomes a lot more rich because you begin to become involved in it, I think, rather than looking at it from a distance and controlling things as we might want to do, because that's a safe place to be. So yeah, Rolfing sometimes creates a certain amount of anxiety, as we go through this process, and then I think as you become a little bit more familiar with that sense of openness, then it's a little safer. You feel comfortable with it. At least that's been my experience. And for me, I know I go in and out of that, depending on what's going on during the day. So it makes life interesting, doesn't it?
Well, it makes it more fulfilling, and it makes you better able to help other people that come into your life, because ultimately everything is about emotions. Virtually everything that we do is all emotionally driven. To basically deny your emotions and just live in your total left brain, which is why I created Captain Biorhythm, to have some type of ability to try and relate to the emotional side of my being. And it was so hard to develop him. I spent one whole year just dressed as Captain Biorhythm. And of course, I received a lot of not physical, but emotional abuse dressed in a costume when it wasn't Halloween, and doing that for an entire year. But it did a lot to open up my emotions and be able to receive negative emotions and positive emotions both, and be able to return both, and get to a point where I was open to experiencing people as people and understanding the importance of emotion in my life and in other people's lives, because you can't really have any type of relationship without emotions. And by releasing that body armoring that basically is a total defense against any type of emotions, it is scary, and it's hard to release the armoring that you have because it's like a protective shell. But it does give you the opportunity, one, to have a more exciting and more interesting life, because now you have the ups and downs and the basic interchange of emotions with other people, both male and female. And two, it is a little scary because you do get hurt emotionally, but you have to be willing to love and realize that if you love, that you're going to get hurt sometimes. But there has to be some type of balance between pain and joy, because you can't differentiate between the two unless you experience both. And I think there's some place where there's some type of balance between those.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking today, Ralph.
Oh, well, thanks for working on me, Richard.
You
I feel a lot better.
Good deal. Thanks.
You're welcome.